Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from quarternight.com. Today is Tuesday the 12th of January 2021, and I want to get on with this series of readings from the latter chapters or surahs of the Quran. And what I'm doing is just going through from Qaf, sort of 50 through to the end, as part of my general sort of tidying up of work and so on, and finishing up of things that I want to do, and reading from the latest edition, which will be, God willing, coming out next month or two, of the Quran, a complete to Revelation. And as those who follow my channel will know, I just read and discuss some parts of what we read, and that's what we're going to do today. I am still getting used to this new technology, so I hope it goes well. I'm just trying to find something that works both for me and for the viewers and so on. Just a quick note to those who write occasionally and say, could I please talk more simply? Or I understand that a lot of people whose first language is not English are, listen to my stuff, and I appreciate that, but unfortunately I just talk the way that I talk. But what I'm trying to do here is put stuff on the screen so that for those for whom things are easier, if they can see it as well, so that you can follow it. But I mean, if I start to change the way that I talk, I mean, where do I stop? Headway, headway beginners. English is my language. I'm not even aware of it. I just speak how I speak. Now I'm going to use this. Yes. So this is the printed page, and we'll see how this goes. So we're looking at Surah 61. What is in the heavens and what is in the earth gives glory to God, and he is the exalted in might, the wise. Now there are several surahs in this vicinity, about 6 or 8, which begin with the same sort of formula. And I've mentioned this before with this sabbaha. It's the idea. I mean, it actually means to swim, but if the thought which I've shared before, which is in a way something swims when it's untied from its moorings, and the way that one imagines God is often constructed. It's actually moored to something. It's tied to something. It's not necessarily free. But it says here, what is in the heavens and what is in the earth gives glory to God. It actually, for want of a better word, resonates or oscillates with the power that God gives it. And in fact, if I'm not a scientist, but if you look at things, whether it's sound or electricity or whatever it is, things are fundamentally oscillating at various speeds, light and so on. So that could be one way of understanding it. But it doesn't say that these things should. It says that they do. And everything, if we compare this with parts of the Quran which talk about at the end of time, that the mountains would become as wool, and as the sand hills kind of drifting away. At some point when the what we incorrectly call the laws of nature stop, all of this created, the creation, the charge which is behind it, which God maintains, that keeps everything, that makes everything what it is just going to stop, and we're going to end, and things will go into a new era. Verse 2, O you who heed warning, why do you say what you do not? O you who heed warning, or O you who have believed. I'm not going to get into why I translate it like this, but except to say that it's based on a pan-textual hermeneutic, which is to go across all of the instances of a particular word in the Quran and see how it is used. And quite clearly, when it's talking, O you who have believed, or O you who heed warning, is in apposition to alladhina kafaru, those who have not heeded warning. If you look at my work, you can see why I do that. However, the fact is, whether one accepts that or has been through that work or not, that in the Quranic context, not to believe is not to heed warning. Read the first 8 verses of Al-Baqarah, and you will see that that quite clearly the recipient of the Quran's job was to warn, or at least a very large part of that job. So if one does not believe, one has not heeded warning. Why do you say what you do not? Most hateful is it to God that you say what you do not. So I'm supposed to be using this, aren't I? There you are. Moving on. Now, I'll just move that up there. Let's just get back to here. I think if we read, most hateful is it to God that you say that what you do not. I think for any human being, certainly for me, there is I hold myself to a very high standard, and there's a shortfall between what I aspire to and what I consistently manage to achieve. And I'm sure that that's the same for most people listening to this. However, my view is that this has a personal application, but it also has an application in the context of the Quran. And I would assert, I'm just going to move this back so you can see the page, that it actually follows on from verse 13 of the previous surah. O you who heed warning, take not as allies people with whom God is wroth. They have despaired of the hereafter, as the atheists have despaired of the companions of the grave. Now, I'm not saying that that the verse that we've just looked at, that you say what you do not, does not have a much broader application than what I've just said there. But the way that I read it, as I read the Quran as a text in the correct order. I don't inflicts upon it the kind of historical guesses that the traditionalist does, that he says this was revealed here, this was revealed there. The Quran says that it is a book. It refers to itself as a book, and it claims to be preserved. It claims that God will preserve it. It claims that it's written down by scribes who are faithful upon pure sheets. Those are the claims that it makes. If you don't like those claims, that's your prerogative. I accept those claims based on my research and based on my verification of the Quran's contents. I can't speak to what other people say about this book and where things were revealed and so on. I'm not so interested in any of that. However, I think that it's a general truism that God requires truth in the inward parts. And that's how I understand this verse. Most hateful is it to God that you say what you do not. Now, we're going to move on to a verse which the traditionalist rather likes, and then we're going to discuss that as well. So let's do that, yes. Verse 4. God loves those who fight in his cause in ranks as though they were a compacted structure. Now, let's just stop there for a second. This sounds like it's to do with battle and, jihad and fighting and killing and so on. And certainly there is a place for those things within the Quranic context. The problem is, well, I mean, for the traditionalists, not so much for me, is that he's kind of taken these things, in my view at least, piecemeal out of the Quran and made jihad into this kind of, well, it's almost like a pillar of his faith, along with the other pillars, which, quite frankly, are quite difficult to reconcile with the contents of this book. I can't speak to the voluminous literature called the Hadith. I mean, that's not something I'm particularly interested in. But in terms of this book on its own terms, certainly there is a place for physical fighting, for resistance, and for protecting the community of believers. However, it is in the context, according to my reading at least, after having done the main job, which is warning. You see, if you read, just take one surah. I would really recommend Surah 7. If you just read Surah 7, read the whole Quran, but Surah 7 is a good one, if you don't want to spend a lot of time, and just see that this is the modus operandi, and this is what the recipient of the Quran, Muhammad, was being called to, was to warn. And the the kind of metric that he's being presented with over and over and over again in the Quran is of warning of people, of warning the elites. You've got the example of Musa, you've got the example of Salih, you've got the example of Nuh, you've got the example of Lut, you've got the example of Hud. The only example that we can find is Yunus, Jonah, who was, as it were, successful in the terms of the fact that people weren't destroyed. So quite clearly, Muhammad's starting position is that of warning. Certainly having warned, and I would argue that Muhammad's original community was destroyed, and that any kind of fighting would be subsequent to that initial destruction. But leaving that to one side, the fact is that to talk about military action in the absence of any sort of initial warning you've left out. I mean, for people who are supposed to be following the example of the Prophet Muhammad, they seem to be, pretty slack when it comes to the actual main point, because that would be my argument anyway. And also, this is rather taken out of context. So, I mean, let's just look at it in context. So you've got God loves those who fight in his cause. Let's press that one. In ranks, as though they were a compacted structure. And that is true. However, to take that and say, jihad, kill the infidel, everyone who doesn't accept brand Islam, I think is a bit of a stretch, as we'll get to see, because the rest of this sort of will bear out these types of thoughts. To continue, and when Moses said to his people, O my people, why do you hinder me when you know that I am the messenger of God to you? Then when they deviated, God caused their hearts to deviate, and God guides not the perfidious people. So, what particular instance of hindering is up for debate? I'm sure the Traditionalist has some extraneous literature he'll point to, but to continue. And when Jesus, son of Mary, said, O children of Israel, I am the messenger of God to you, confirming what is with me of the Torah, and bringing glad tidings of a messenger coming after me, whose name is more praiseworthy. Then when he came to them with clear signs, they said, this is obvious sorcery. Now, a couple of points about this. First of all, obvious sorcery. Sihr. We get this a lot in the Quran. It says it's sorcery, here it's sorcery, there it's sorcery. I've been through every single instance of this word in the Quran, and my opinion is that if you look at it, it's always talking about a situation in which the accusation is that someone's trying to get political power. It was the accusation they bring against Musa or Moses when he goes to see to Pharaoh or Pharaoh. They accuse him of this. It's very easy to do nowadays. There are some really good resources. For example, corpus.quran. I can't remember, maybe com. There are all kinds of resources online where you can look things up by word or root very quickly and see how words are used across the body of the text. And so if you think about it today, really what we have today is an updated version of sorcery. If you showed Moses or anybody from his time or anybody from Muhammad's time or anybody from even 200, 150 years ago, modern technology and its use in terms of the control of the human mind, what would they call it? They would call it sorcery. But what's the outcome? What's the output? What's the kind of the payload of this technology, of this matrix? It's political power. It's people whose minds are entirely shaped by the input that comes into them. Monkey see, monkey do. I mean, if we've learnt nothing, over the last 11 months, it is that you can train 98% of people to believe whatever you want. Literally. And this is why, just as an aside, my own personal beef, if you want to put it that way, my own personal kind of bone to pick is not with the feminists, it's not with any of the people who are destroying the West, not the Black Lives Matter people, not the Antifa. No. Why? Because they haven't got a brain quite. I mean, I'm not saying they're stupid. I'm sure they're very good at different things, programming or, destroying houses or whatever it is. But they will think whatever you tell them to think. As the elites know, they paid to occupy these people's, well, the space between their ears. And so that's why, in my opinion, warning must go to the elites, because the elites they rule. They are in charge. And if they want people to wear, nappies on their faces, they will wear nappies on their faces. If they want them to, men to have good manners and open doors for women, and for women to be virtuous and good mothers, or at least to aspire to that, they'll do that. If they want to train them to become wanton prostitutes and violent, disgusting, people you wouldn't trust to look after a pig, they'll do that too. You can train them, as we have seen. I probably wouldn't have said this a couple of years ago because it would have sounded too outlandish. But now I think we can dispense with any of the pretense. The one thing we've all learned over the last 11 months is that you can train people to do anything. And so this is going back to the point of sorcery. When in the Quran they're accusing people of sorcery, it's not just the kind of the magical aspect of it. It's the association between that, the leverage that has upon the minds of the people who observe it, and therefore on the access to power. If you remember, they said that Musa and his brother, they want to make themselves, kind of like kings in the land. That's sorcery. So when you hear the word sorcery in the Quran, we're not talking about just sleight of hand. We're talking about power over the mind. And that's an important distinction. Another point about this, let's just switch back to this. And when Jesus, son of Mary, said, "O children of Israel, I am the messenger of God to you, confirming what is before me of the Torah, and bringing glad tidings of a messenger coming after me, whose name is more praiseworthy." Now, in the Arabic, the name here is Ahmad. And the Traditionalist has got a lot of things he likes to point to on this. I've got some notes here which are quite hard to read without my glasses. But, I'm sure people who have read around this subject know that the Traditionalist sort of latches onto the word paraclete and says that it's very much like another word. So you've got parakletos, usually rendered the comforter, and then perikletos, which is the much praised, and then they jump from much praised to Ahmed, and then Ahmed, it must be Muhammad, and so on and so forth. Maybe not, but Ahmed actually means more praised. I mean, Muhammad's name was Muhammad, so I just stick to what the actual Arabic text says. I have read the Gospel of St. Barnabas, so please don't ask me about that, I have had a lot of people suggest that I read it. I've read it a couple of times. I think it was a married couple. I think their surname was Rag, who translated it from the Italian. It was stolen from the offices of a Catholic, highly placed Catholic bureaucrat, and then later translated into various languages. I have read it a couple of times, and in there it uses much more specific language. My opinion about the Gospel according to Barnabas is that it's a pious forgery. The reason being is that I've read a lot of pious forgeries or written by all kinds of different people, and it has all the signs of it. It has, to my mind, it's post-Islamic forgery. And if I didn't think that, I would say that, but that's what I think, and so I don't take it seriously. But in there, they try to sort of make this connection. Now, that's what the Arabic says. It says Ahmad. It doesn't say Muhammad. So that's how I translate it. Now we switch here to verse 7. And who is more unjust than he who invents a lie about God when he is invited to submission? And God guides not the wrongdoing people. Now, at this point, see, quite often the traditionalists, I'm not here just to bash the traditionalist, it is sort of part of what I do. I do have to critique him as part of my main task. My main task really is to do with the God protocol. It is to do with warning the elite. It is to do with delivering a protocol based on the Quran to the elite of this time. That's what I'm really about. I'm not going to get into the details of that specifically, but that's what I'm about. I'm not primarily about Islam, for or against it. But the fact is that the traditionalist does rather like to take verses and take them and sort of run with them out of context. So here we have, and who is more unjust than he who invents a lie about God when he is invited to submission? Now the word here is el-Islam. And so they'll get very hot under the collar, and especially if they don't read what comes before it or after it, and say, you see, you don't accept Islam. And by Islam, they mean what they mean. They mean this whole thing that is a construct, which I call brand Islam. I don't have a particular kind of thing against brand Islam any more than I do against, brand Catholicism or brand, Protestantism or whatever it is. But let's be honest, it is a religion constructed by men. It doesn't emerge naturally from the pages of the Quran by any means. If that's the first point. The second point is, if you hold them to a definition of this religion, and then you go point by point and see if you can find real proof for it, it's quite difficult to do that. And certainly, if I'm not going to get into all now, but if you just, the actual kind of entry point into this religion is just to express a sentiment which is found nowhere in the Quran. Nowhere in the Quran do you find what the traditionalists will call the Shahada. Certainly Moses didn't say that. Certainly Muhammad didn't say that. Certainly Jesus didn't say it. But yet they're all Muslims. It all gets very kind of insha'Allah-y, and vague, and nobody wants to kind of look at it and let's all just go back to work and start making money again, just like all the unbelievers. So I don't really take any of that very seriously. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, look at the context. It's just come after two people. It's come after Moses, who, are we saying Moses was not Muslim? Are we saying Moses didn't submit to God? No, I'm saying Moses was Muslim in the true sense of the word, and that he did submit to God. Did he follow the 5 pillars of Islam? No, he certainly didn't. And this is why, when you kind of get into the details with the traditionalists, they get very defensive, and when they can't defeat you, they get aggressive, and then when that doesn't work, they call you a Jewish agent and stuff like that. So whatever, it just gets rather tedious, and that's why it's not my main focus. But then look what comes next. You've got Moses, and then you've got Jesus. So these are examples of people who invite to submission. You have Moses saying, "Oh, my people." You have Jesus saying, "Oh, children of Israel." You see? But they didn't say, "Oh, children of Israel, you've got to pray 5 times a day, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, got to do the other." Didn't say that. In fact, we can prove that from the Quran. The Quran says he gave different people different laws. It all gets a bit knotty, a bit difficult, and that's fine. And the problem is that, and it is right to analyze it. The only problem, and it isn't a problem for me, but there is a problem, it is that this religion, this construct, this brand doesn't survive the process. And that wouldn't matter, except that this brand needs this book in order to justify the rest of its stuff, which all comes from these other books. Anyway, let's continue. Verse 8. They want to extinguish the light of God with their mouths, but God will perfect his light, though the false claimers of guidance be averse. He it is that sent his messenger with the guidance and the doctrine of truth, that he might make it manifest over all doctrine, though the idolaters be averse. Now, at this point, quite frequently what you'll get is the idea of, inshallah, God is going to make Islam, brand Islam, what I call brand Islam, reign over the whole world and all of this stuff. look, all the Muslims coming into the West, this is some big plan. Do you really think that? I don't think that. If you want to know what I think the ruling elite are moving. They're just moving people around. They're destroying the West, and they're using people from one place, shifting them to another place in order to make everywhere the same. They don't have any loyalties to any particular countries, any particular races, any particular peoples. But what they do want is to make sure that everywhere is pretty crap. And what's happening with this is that Europe has been made pretty crap. That seems to be the job. So if you believe that it's been a matter of like where God is helping somehow to make the deen of Islam, what does it say here, manifest over all doctrine, I'm afraid you're living in a delusion. What's happening is the ruling elite are using people who in their own countries failed to create society, certainly in the last 500, 600, 700 years, that anyone else would want to live in, and in which they don't want to live, and so they've gone somewhere better. Okay, that's it. And what they're doing is they're using those people to make those places worse and actually more ripe for tyranny. That's all that's happening. Okay, so if that's all that's happening, what does this mean? Does this mean here that what we're talking about is this brand Islam is going to be manifest over all doctrine? I for one don't believe that for a second. I do believe the Quran is correct. I believe it is from God. It is inspired and is preserved. But can anybody today point to me and say, look, this country is a country in which this model is something that is going to be rolled out across the world, unless of course by manifest over all doctrine we mean the kind of tyranny that's being rolled out across the world right now. I don't think that's what the Muslim, traditionalist Muslim means. It's certainly not what I mean either. So what I don't think is that this brand, which, if you want my honest opinion, has been created probably by, or certainly to a large extent developed by Western agencies, this is the light that's going to come to the world. Not in any world that I've ever seen. What I do see, though, however, is that they're setting everybody up, people from other countries, people in the West, for a clash of civilizations. This is completely planned, and these are basically pawns being moved around a chessboard. That's the way I see it. I personally don't have any loyalty to any side in this. My loyalty is to God and the believers. That's it. And when I say believers, these are very few people that I personally work with. Those are people I'm loyal with. Outside of that, the West, as far as I'm concerned, it deserves everything it's going to get. It's polluted itself. It's become totally immoral. It's really a revolting place now. The West, it's just gone. It's finished. So that's my position on it. My position is that I believe that God will bring the believers together. I personally think we're living in a time very similar to that of Noah. I think things are so bad now that there is only this. What we're going through right now is a choice where people are being forced, thankfully at last, to make a real decision between God and, for want of a better word, mammon, and to make a decision between pretend religion and actually choosing God. And it requires some courage, and it requires to kind of think through what you really mean. Because you're going to have to, people realizing now they might have to die for this, instead of just, have to suffer a coffee latte instead of a cappuccino. All right, so let's carry on. Just a few more verses to go. O you who heed warning, shall I direct you to a trade that will deliver you from a painful punishment? You believe in God and his messenger, and strive in the cause of God with your wealth and your lives. That is best for you if you but knew. And now we have what I consider to be a parenthetical statement, which we'll just get to. And however, before I do, I would like to say that it's mentioned God and his messenger, and obviously the correlation is with the people at verse 5. Moses said to his people, "O my people," at verse 6, and then when Jesus, son of Mary, said, "O children of Israel." So it's relating back, and now we've got Muhammad, who is the messenger of God again. You believe in God and his messenger, and strive in the cause of God with your wealth and your lives. That is best for you if you but knew. Now we get to a parenthetical statement. He will forgive you your transgressions and make you enter gardens beneath which rivers flow, and goodly dwellings in gardens of perpetual abode. That is the great achievement. Close brackets. But you love another. Now, if we go back to the beginning of our reading, if I can drag this page up. Let's put this down here. Verse 2. O you who heed warning, why do you say what you do not? Most hateful is it to God that you say what you do not. Now, this to my mind relates, if we go back to here, but you love another. And this, and what is it that people really love? I think the answer, the question answers itself. Help from God and a near victory. Okay, this, and then we have, this is a sort of ellipsis. Are you promised? And give thou glad tidings to the believers. So this is the promise of fath, of victory. And now the last verse kind of ties together what the whole thing's been talking about. O you who heed warning, be helpers of God. As Jesus, son of Mary, said to the disciples, who are my helpers for God? The disciples said, we are the helpers of God. And a number of the children of Israel believed, and a number denied. And we strengthened those who heeded warning against their enemy, so they became dominant. This surah is one thing. It's knit from one wool. It's sewn out of one cloth. And quite often, when the traditionalist reads, he pulls things apart. He'll take, for example, God loves those who fight in his cause in ranks as though they were a compacted structure. Yes, he does, but let's look at the whole surah. Who is more unjust than he who invents a lie about God and when he's invited to submission? And he'll emphasize, al-Islam, al-Islam. This is called assumed conclusions, all right? This is a trick. It's an intellectual trick. I mean, intellectual in the sense that it's a trick of the mind. I know one. When the Christians use, for example, the term Bible-believing Christians. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. That's what they're saying. Well, all Christians think they're Bible-believing. If you didn't think you were a Bible-believing Christian, you wouldn't be a Christian. All Christians think they're believing. I've never met a Christian who says he's a Bible-unbelieving Christian. The Bible can be made to say all kinds of different things. And it appears to say those things. That much of the problem is that the Bible nowhere claims to be one book, not anywhere. But nobody seems to mention or notice the fact that it isn't one book. And to be fair to the whoever actually were the original purveyors and bearers of the Hebrew scriptures, they never treated it as one book. They had various scrolls. They would read from the scroll of Isaiah, or read from the scroll of Jeremiah, read from the Torah, whatever it was. But they didn't regard it as one book. But there's something that happens when you put things between two covers and then bind them together. And the Quran does refer to itself as a single book. It does refer to itself as something with a beginning, a middle, and an end, or at least it refers to itself as something which is which is sent down over a particular period, it does refer to itself as something complete. And certainly my own investigations have shown it, proven to my satisfaction, that it is in the correct order, and is preserved. However, the Christians, and to be fair, the Jews, they can't say that about their scriptures. However, to use the expression "a Bible-believing Christian," which is something Protestants say a lot, what it really means is it assumes that anyone who agrees with them believes in the Bible. That's what it does, okay? And this is the kind of assumed conclusion. Another example of it would be, which Muslims use quite a lot, which is the expression "a revert." So-and-so is a revert. I'm a revert to Islam. I know where this comes from. This is based on, this is some sort of modern riff on a hadith, which has it that apparently everyone was originally a Muslim, but your parents make you something else. This is total nonsense, of course. If by Muslim we mean what the traditionalist means by it, it's total nonsense to assert that anybody had a pre-existing condition in which they had a requirement to follow the 5 pillars of Islam and all of the tenets of, very actually contradictory, some of them, of the various schools of what's called Islam. No, this is a lie. It's not true. So, but it's a way of, if you say a revert to something, you're assuming all of your conclusions. You're assuming that you're making the person you're talking to assume what you want this word to mean. It's kind of, you're painting them into a corner. Well, this is what's happened to the traditionalists with the word Islam. He said, well, Islam means what I mean by it. However, he needs it to mean other things too. For example, he needs Abraham to have been a Muslim. A Muslim. I mean, I would argue that being a Muslim isn't even possible, any more possible than it is being pregnant. Muslim is a state. You either are or you're not. It's not a thing. It's not like you join a club, you get a membership. But leaving that to one side, I mean, if we're going to say that was Abraham a Muslim, well, it depends what you mean by it. And that's when it all gets, if you've ever seen those Find the Lady things, those guys you see sometimes on London Bridge, they hide a pea underneath the shell and move it around. This is what happens with this. On the one hand, yeah, he was a Muslim, but okay, so what's our definition? Did he say the Shahada? No, he didn't do that. Did he do this? No, he didn't do that. So actually, anybody else who hadn't done those things wouldn't be a Muslim. But in this case, we're going to say he was one. Oh, well, he was born before. Ah, well, then maybe the definition of what we actually mean by Muslim is different to what you mean by it. I don't have a problem with the Quranic definition of Muslim as someone who's submitted to God. What the problem is that religionists then come to that with a very clear idea of what they mean by what submitted to God should be. They then find that definition doesn't really fit with the book they claim as their foundational scripture, and so to get out of that they attack it, because what else have they got? They can't do anything else. They are really stuffed. Anyway, this surah stands on its own merits as far as I'm concerned, if we accept that the people who followed Jesus and the people who followed, who was their messenger, and the people who followed Musa and he was their messenger, were also following Islam. The Islam, not in this kind of assumed conclusion sense, but in the sense of, all right, let me put it this way. God says to Abraham in the Quran, he says, submit. And he says, aslamtu li rabbil alameen. He says, I have submitted to the Lord of all creation. That's it. That's what he said. There was nothing else to it. Now that wouldn't be sufficient. That would not be sufficient for any mullah, any purveyor of what I call brand Islam today. What Ibrahim did would not be sufficient. That would be considered beyond the pale. Who's right? I know where I stand. I don't have a problem with the way that the Quran describes Islam. My only problem is that, if you want to call it that, is that when discussing this book, one assumes that you assume these conclusions, the kind of conclusions that people assume when they use expressions like revert to Islam or a Bible-believing Christian. If you don't come to it with those assumed conclusions, for some reason people don't like it. I wonder why. But this is my take on this particular chapter, and in my view, it works as a single lesson, but it isn't talking about an organized religion or even a disorganized one, but one which has follows the dogmas and the required conclusions of those that we call Islamicists or whatever. In my view, it doesn't mean they're not entitled to their view. They're perfectly entitled to it. I just don't consider that they have a right to impose their conclusions upon me when they quite clearly won't do their own sort of primary research. If, as I was saying to somebody just the other day, when I first read the Quran, which is now about 23 or 24 years ago, I didn't start off by going, oh, I've read this book, now I'm going to go and tell the Muslims what it really means, because they don't know. No, that wasn't it at all. I read the book in English translation at that time, was very impressed. I continue to be impressed by it. And I'd missed the whole, Muslims are bad thing, because I was living abroad. I spent most of my adult life outside of the UK. And I went back to the UK on a business trip, a paid business trip. And I took an empty suitcase with me, and I got off the aeroplane at Heathrow and went straight to wherever it was. I can't remember the area of London. Perhaps it was Kilburn or somewhere, to an Islamic bookshop. This is before the days of the internet and so on, or before the days of kind of big internet, as it were. And I just said to them, I've read this book, I'm really impressed. These were the first quote-unquote Muslims I'd ever met. I can't say I was, very impressed, but what I did like is that they unlike Christians, they didn't try to be nice, if you know what I mean. That kind of like fake, plasticky sort of nice thing. They didn't do that, and I did appreciate that, but it was quite difficult getting to any kind of specificity with any of them. But I said, look, what do I do? What I put down £200 on the desk, on the cash register, whatever you call it, on the cash thing there, which is more like about 500 today. And I said, what do I need to read to understand this? What am I missing? What else do I need? So it wasn't that I came into it and thought, I'm now going to tell you all. It wasn't like that at all. I thought, I could see when I first read the Quran that this was an amazing book, that it was from God. I had answers when I first read this book in the first 2 or 3 pages of Al-Baqarah, which answered to my satisfaction the distinction between grace and works, which Christianity's still trying to work out. I mean, Pelagius versus Augustine. I mean, 1700 years later, there's that argument still playing itself out in various forms, and yet I had an answer immediately. So I was very impressed. What happened was, as I read the book, and you get to these bits which really are kind of the core proof texts to the traditionalist for his religion, which he needs to append to this book. And I'd be reading in the English translation, and I was reading the Abdul Yusuf Ali translation, which is an attempt at sort of King James, exaltation. It's not a bad translation, but you get to those bits which the traditionalist really sort of claims his religion on the basis of which, and I would read it, and it would kind of go, you could feel it was like, and having been through religion, having been through Christianity before, I really recommend that everybody just go and join a religion for a bit, they're all the same. Once you've seen how one works, you don't really need to kind of experience a lot. They're all the same. You get the same types of people, the same interests. I actually wanted God, and I wasn't so interested in where I found him. I was more interested in truth than in lifestyle, and I still am. So that's what happened. So it wasn't that I kind of came to this with, I'm now going to explain what this means. I didn't know at that time. I thought perhaps somebody else did, and I took all of these books, and as I say, it's more like £500 worth of books today. I had a suitcase full, and I got through the business, whatever it was, I can't remember what it was. Got back on the plane and went back home and read. Just read them all. I should have read the lot. And at the end of it, I realized they don't have it. I could see that. You know if somebody knows something or not, and they don't know. So, okay. But I was still left with the questions that this book, the Quran, had raised. And so that's, I suppose, the beginning to some extent of my own journey, of my own process. And it's not that I'm out to in any way denigrate or attack traditionalist Muslims. I come from a Christian background. I mean, look what's happening to the West right now, okay? Democracy, so-called, and how insane it is there. The traditionalist Muslim does not have the monopoly on either stupidity or narrow-mindedness, but he has a fairly good holding in the franchise. And what I wasn't going to do was to allow his refusal to do some very basic spade work to prevent me from doing my own due diligence. And that's really what it's all been about. So I don't know if this talk has been somewhat more boisterous than usual. I think along with everyone else, suffering to some extent from the end of winter. Also, where I happen to live in Russia. It's a long, hard winter, and it takes its toll on you. And sometimes that expresses itself. So that's where I am. My plan, I'm just continuing with what I've been doing, and I'm getting very close to bringing some things to a close. If you've watched this far and you're interested in what you've seen, and if you have a good background, a strong background in something, especially a STEM subject, I would like to ask you to go through my work on the muqatta'at, on the mysterious letters. If you just look at the last few videos, it's about 2 or 3 back, and up until the end of February, beginning of March, I'm still open to considered, constructive, reasoned, germane, succinct feedback on that. Now, this is a big thing to go through, but if you've got a good mind, if you're used to analysing difficult subjects, and then I am interested up until that point in what you think, if it's specific, but you will have to watch the whole thing, and it will take a long time. And no, I'm not going to send you, a printed format and blah, blah, blah. It is what it is. This is how I'm releasing it for the time being. But I know that intelligent people follow my channel, and I just want to sort of give a heads up that for till the end of February, I'm still very much open to very specific feedback on what I've done there. And after which I'm going to be sort of, taking that to the next stage. Anyway, that's it for now, and I hope everyone is well. And I hope to drop a new video in the next, week or so. That's all for now. If you're listening to YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Quran free using the button in the top right-hand corner, or buy the hard copy there at 10% less than on Amazon. I also encourage you to sign up for the Quranite Plus newsletter on the site to get occasional micro updates. You can download the audio from my YouTube videos to your mobile device using the links in the drop-down below. I recommend meetquranites.com to connect with other Quran-alone believers. Like if you like, comment if you have something constructive to say, and subscribe to get more each week. And use the link in the drop-down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short, eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.